Science Fiction University.
Hello and welcome to Science Fiction University.
We're your fan and writer hosts. I'm Blue Gal.
And I'm Driftglass, and we know it's been a minute, but you can still visit Science Fiction University, still open for business, at our website, sciencefictionuniversity.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There's also a Patreon button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution to Science Fiction University, P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
We know this is the day after the inauguration. And the world looks pretty dark, and we're all feeling a little low, and we're feeling it, and so forth. And we don't want you to think that we've abandoned the political sphere.
No.
It's just that tomorrow, Wednesday, we're on the Bob Cesca show. Uh-huh. And then Driftglass is going to be on the BradCast later tomorrow.
Yep.
With Digby and Desi Doyen. And then Thursday, we'll do another political podcast. I don't know what fresh stuff we'll have to talk about by that time, but I'm sure there'll be something. And so we're going to get right back into it. But 3 political podcasts in 1 week is more than we usually do. And 1
knitting podcast, I might add.
And I'll be doing a knitting podcast after Bob Cesca. I'm sure Bob Cesca will have a lot to say about that. Mm-hmm. So we are doing a lot this week, and we're glad to be doing it. Mm-hmm. But we thought, okay, if we do a political podcast today, that means 4. Maybe this is the week we do a Science Fiction University, given how many outlets we are doing political stuff on.
Right.
Now, we understand that if science fiction is not your thing, and you think talking about spaceships and bug-eyed monsters seems inappropriate for the occasion, we understand if you want to skip this.
Sure.
But, right?
But before you go, before you walk out the door in a huff or whatever your mode of transportation is, how about you give us 90 seconds of your time to listen to a clip from one of the works of science fiction we'll be covering and spoiling today.
Our projections show that by the year 2025, not only America, but the entire planet will be under the protection and the dominion of this power alliance. The gains have been substantial, both for ourselves and for you, the human power elite. You have given us entree to the resources we need in our ongoing quest for multidimensional expansion. And in return, the per capita income of each of you here tonight has grown, and this year alone, by an average 39%. And I've just received word that our forces have won a major victory. The underground terrorist network has been destroyed here on the West Coast. We are off crisis alert. The situation is normal again.
How you doing, boys? I didn't know you'd been recruited. Welcome aboard.
Earth is our stepping stone.
You know, you boys really should have dressed for the party. Now you can afford it. I gotta tell you, I sure am proud to be here. You seen the whole place?
Make this division.
I haven't had a chance to yet.
Come on, I'll show you around. You know, I knew me and you had a lot in common. First time we met.
That little gem predicting that by the year 2025, the entire planet would be under the dominion of a global economic alliance of invading aliens disguised as humans and wealthy human collaborators is from John Carpenter's 1988 cult classic. Note the year, 2025. The movie is called They Live, and it was actually adapted from a 1963 short story by Ray Nelson entitled 8 o'clock in the morning. And because today's episode is about lies and propaganda as plot devices in science fiction. Weird timing, Blue Gal. Just worked out that way.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so let me just read a little bit from the original story to They Live called 8 o'clock in the Morning by Ray Nelson. This was published the year I was born, 1963.
That's a short story. This is like 5-6 pages long tops.
Right. It's a 5 or 6 page long. I'm only going to read one page and about 5 lines. We're trying to keep these short, but just to give you a flavor, as Driftglass says. At the end of the show, the hypnotist told his subjects, awake, something unusual happened. One of the subjects awoke all the way. This had never happened before. His name was George Nada, and he blinked out at the sea of faces in the theater, at first unaware of anything out of the ordinary. Then he noticed, spotted here and there in the crowd, the non-human faces, the faces of the fascinators. They had been there all along, of course, but only George was really awake, so only George recognized them for what they were. He understood everything in a flash, including the fact that if he were to give any outward sign, the fascinators would instantly command him to return to his former state, and he would obey. He left the theater, pushing out into the neon night, carefully avoiding any indication that he saw the green reptilian flesh or the multiple yellow eyes of the rulers of the earth. One of them asked him, "Got a light, buddy?" George gave him a light, then moved on. At intervals along the street, George saw the posters hanging with photographs of the fascinators' multiple eyes and various commands printed under them, such as work 8 hours, play 8 hours, slept 8 hours, and marry and reproduce. A TV set in the window of a store caught George's eye, but he looked away in the nick of time. When he didn't look at the fascinator in the screen, he could resist the command. Stay tuned to this station. George lived alone in a little sleeping room, and as soon as he got home, the first thing he did was to disconnect the TV set. In other rooms, he could hear the TV sets of his neighbors, though. Most of the time, the voices were human, but now and then he heard the arrogant, strangely bird-like croaks of the aliens. "Obey the government," said one croak. "We are the government," said another. "We are your friends. You'd do anything for a friend, wouldn't you? Obey. Work." Suddenly, the phone rang. George picked it up. It was one of the fascinators. "Hello," it squawked. "This is your control, Chief of Police Robinson. You are an old man, George Nada. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, your heart will stop. Please repeat." "I am an old man," said George. "Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, my heart will stop." The control hung up. "No, it won't," whispered George.
Yeah, that's obviously very different than the movie, but you can see where the idea, if you've seen the movie, you can see where the ideas came from.
Yeah, no, and everybody's kind of zombie hypnotized by these aliens.
By the fascinators.
Extraterrestrial aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And before we go any further, we should warn you that this episode, it's only the decent thing to do to tell you that this episode will contain spoilers for 1988's John Carpenter film, They Live. Oops, sorry about that. That was a little bit too late. But also Frederick Pohl's short story, The Day the Icicle Works Closed. A little bit of Frank Miller and Robert Rodriguez's 2005 film, Sin City. The Star Trek Next Generation episode entitled The Devil's Due. A small but important bit of the 1984 movie 2010, The Year We Make Contact, which was the unnecessary sequel of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and is based on the novel by Arthur C. Clarke of the same name. And speaking of Arthur Clarke, we're going to go a little bit heavy with Clarke today, and we're going to do a read aloud of a 65-year-old short story by Arthur Clarke that got jolted back into my memory, my active memory, by the recent fight over TikTok. I hadn't read this thing in years, but suddenly something clicked. I go, oh, man. Oh, this is going to be interesting. See if you can figure out why. Mm-hmm. Now, the story is very meta for the period of March 1960. That's when it was published. First published in Playboy, 1960, March. It was collected in Tales of 10 Worlds, which I'm pretty sure I have around here somewhere. I dug up some dog-eared yellowed pages. It's pretty long for a short story, so I'm just going to read selections of it, but it's entitled I Remember Babylon, and the story takes the form of a non-fiction article written by Clarke himself to warn the United States of impending danger, which he caused. And he feels real bad about that. And he feels bad about it because Arthur Clarke was, in fact, the conceptual inventor of the geostationary satellite. The idea that a satellite could be put into orbit at a certain height, at a certain orbit, to stay over one spot. And wouldn't it be cool if broadcast networks used that to broadcast television signals that everyone could see? Why, that would be very commercially successful. And he thinks he's in a conversation with someone who's going to buy his talent and hook him up with some deals on the TV tube. And that isn't who he talks to at all. I'm jumping about the middle of the third page. All right, this is Clarke talking. All right, I conceded. But why should 50 million American homes start switching channels just as soon as they can tune in to Moscow? I admire the Russians, but their entertainment is worse than their politics. After the Bolshoi, what have you. And for me, a little ballet goes a long way. Once again, I was treated to that particularly humorless smile. Hartford, and that's the antagonist of the story, a guy named Hartford, had been saving up his Sunday punch, and now he let me have it. You were the one who brought the Russians into this, he said. They're involved, sure, but only as contractors. The independent agency I'm working for is hiring their services. That, I remarked dryly, must be some agency. It is. Just about the biggest, even though the United States tries to pretend it doesn't exist. Oh, I said rather stupidly. So that's your sponsor. I'd heard those rumors about the USSR launching satellites for China. Now it began to look as if the rumors fell far short of the truth. But how far short, I still had no conception. My God, I said. Then he goes into, pardon me, I jumped ahead a little bit. Then this gentleman invites him up to his room to look at a movie that his sponsors plan to broadcast to the entire United States. And it has a very innocuous and boring title. It's an art film, so we can smuggle it past the people in customs. But it's hardcore pornography. It's artistically shot scenes from a temple in India where every sexual position in the universe has been carved in stone. And it's really dirty, according to it's art, but it's dirty. And he shows this film to Arthur Clarke, and Arthur Clarke says, "My God," I said, when I had recovered some of my composure, "are you sure you're going to telecast that?" Hartford laughed. "Believe me," he answered, that's nothing. It just happens to be the only reel I can carry around safely. We're prepared to defend it any day on the grounds of genuine art, historic interest, religious tolerance. Oh, we've thought of all the angles. But it doesn't really matter. No one can stop us. For the first time in history, any form of censorship becomes utterly impossible. Now, this is where the TikTok part of this clicked into my brain. There's simply no way of enforcing it. The customer can get what he wants right in his own home. Lock the door, switch on the TV set. Friends and families will never know. Very clever, I said. But don't you think such a diet will soon pall? The guy replies, "Of course, variety is the spice of life. We have plenty of conventional entertainment. Let me worry about that. And every so often we'll have information programs." I hate the word propaganda. To tell the cloistered American public what's really going on in the world. Our special features will just be the bait. "Mind if I have some fresh air?" I said. "It's getting stuffy in here." And then he goes out to the balcony and looks at the beautiful place where he's staying. And the guy says, the Bible I used for this, and this might be unfamiliar to some of you, was the Kinsey Report. The Kinsey Report is very 1960s. It's the report on the sexual behavior of Americans. It was very frank, very open. It was done based on survey analysis. I believe a TV series was done about it. But it was very frank and open and told what people were really into. And Arthur Clarke responds, "All of it? If the audience is big enough, yes. We won't bother about feeble-minded farm boys who get too attached to the stock." You know what that means, right? Everyone's clear about what that means. Yeah. But the four main sexes will get the full treatment. That's the beauty of the movie you just saw. It appeals to all of them. You can say that again, I muttered. We've had a lot of fun planning out the feature I've christened Queer Corner. Remember, this is 1960.
1960, yes.
Don't laugh. No go-ahead agency can afford to ignore that audience, or as we'd say today, demographic. At least 10 million if you count the ladies, bless their clogs and tweeds. If you think I'm exaggerating, look at all the male art mags on the newsstands. It was no trick, blackmailing some of the daintier muscle men into performing for us. So he goes through all of the types of pornography and prurient stuff they're going to broadcast, including Can You Take It?, which is all about endurance and beating people up. And like it's Ow My Balls from Idiocracy. There's a whole torture segment, torture through the ages. They're gonna do it. And then I'll continue with the story. And there are dozens of other angles, but by now you'll have the general picture. The Avenue, he means Madison Avenue, thinks it knows all about hidden persuasion. Believe me, it doesn't. The world's best practical psychologists are in the East these days. Remember Korea and brainwashing? We've learned a lot since then. There's no need for violence anymore. People enjoy being brainwashed if you set about it the right way. I just want you to rest with that for a second. The idea that people will enjoy being brainwashed if it's presented in the right way. In 1960. And you, I said, are going to brainwash the United States? That's quite an order. Exactly. And the country will love it, despite all the screams from the Congress and the churches, not to mention the networks, of course. They'll make the biggest fuss of all when they find they can't compete with us. And then he gave a whistle of alarm. Time to start packing. I've got to be at an unpronounceable airport of yours about 6 o'clock. And they bid each other farewell. And that Mr. Hartford walks out the door. And Clark finally says, not a hope, but I've got a pretty good idea of the picture now. And incidentally, aren't you afraid that I'll spill the beans? Won't Arthur Clark write this very article exposing them for what they really are? And the man replies, why should I be? The more publicity you can give us, the better. Although our advertising campaign doesn't get into top gear for a few months yet, I feel you've earned this advance notice. And as I said, your books helped give me the idea. Right through the heart, man. His gratitude was quite genuine, by God. It left me completely speechless. Nothing can stop us, he declared. For the first time, the fanaticism that lurked behind the smooth, cynical facade was not altogether under control. History is on our side. We'll be using America's own decadence as a weapon against her, and it's a weapon for which there is no defense. The Air Force won't attempt space piracy by shooting down a satellite nowhere near American territory. The FCC can't even protest to a country that doesn't exist in the eyes of the State Department. If you have any other suggestions, I'd be most interested to hear them. I had none then, and I have none now. Perhaps these words may give some brief warning before the first teasing advertisements appear in the trade papers and may start stirring the elephantine alarm among the networks. But will it make any difference? Hartford didn't think so, and he may be right. History is on our side. I cannot get those words out of my head. Land of Lincoln and Franklin and Melville, I love you and I wish you well. But into my heart blows a cold wind from the past, for I remember Babylon. End of story. That's goddamn Arthur Clarke in 1960, predicting decadent Americans will have such an appetite for garbage and porn and nonsense, laced with pornography, laced with propaganda, laced with America sucks. You know, America's a terrible place.
And they will not care if it's Chinese spyware.
Nope.
They will not care.
Not care one bit. In fact, they'll rise up and protest.
Yeah.
Because
how dare you deprive me of my Chinese spyware? Isn't this a free country?
This is freedom. What are you taking my freedom for? Damn you. And, you know, and I got to say, other than the delivery system and sort of the conceit of the article, it's very, very accurate about human nature. And that's what we're talking about today in terms of science fiction. Good science fiction really does understand human nature in all of its ugliness sometimes.
Yep. And also science fiction is full of stories about aliens taking over by replacing humans, such as the invasion of the body snatchers, or aliens trying to brainwash humans using drugs or torture. But today we're tackling something different. Taking over using deception and illusion, usually with the aid of witting or unwitting collaborators. For example, Buck Flowers' character of the Drifter in They Live is every MAGA Republican's wet dream. He starts out broke and cowardly, and by the end of the movie, he's wearing a tuxedo and drinking champagne at the big meeting of the Oligarch Alien Alliance.
There ain't no countries anymore. No more good guys. They're running the whole show. They own everything, the whole goddamn planet. They can do whatever they want. What's wrong with having it good for a change? And they're going to let us have it good if we just help them. They're going to leave us alone. Let us make some money. You can have a little taste of that good life, too. Now, I know you want it. Hell, everybody does.
You do it to your own kind.
What's the threat? We all sell out every day. Might as well be on the winning team.
At the other end of the economic scale is the other secondary villain, Holly Thompson, played by Meg Foster, who you will know by her very, very, very blue eyes. If you've ever seen her in a movie, that's how you know her. A television executive who fakes being a member of the Resistance, but reveals herself to be helping the aliens take over. So what we have here are the three elements that make alien conquest possible: the greed, self-interest, and cowardice of the wealthy, the media, and certain members of the working class. It's a weird formula. It's so weird. On the other hand, in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode The Devil's Due, an alien named Ardra has a seemingly foolproof plan to take over the planet of Ventax 2, and the Enterprise's captain and crew as well. She presents herself as a manifestation of the devil, who has signed a contract with the ancestors of the planet's inhabitants 1,000 years before. Back then, the planet had been a wreck, a total wreck, social and environmental catastrophe. And Ardra, in her contract, promises 1,000 years of peace and prosperity in exchange for her taking possession of the planet after the 1,000 years have passed. So, on the 1,000th anniversary of the contract being signed, an alien purporting to be Ardra shows up, and by conjuring earthquakes and visions that people actually do see, she convinces the government that she is the one and only Ardra, and that they must surrender the planet to her. See, the Ardra legend had become what we would call an apocalyptic cult, an end times cult. And as the date of her prophesied return got closer, the populace of the planet started to freak out, as people do when the end of the world is coming, which included taking some Federation scientists hostage, which is how the Enterprise got sucked into this whole thing. But in this case, there was no need to subvert the media or co-opt the elites because they were already convinced the myth was real.
A fairly ingenious combination of force field projection, holography, and transporter effects. Ardra controls her. Magic, literally, by the blink of an eye. Centuries-old technology. An implant which permits the movements of her eye to choose and activate each illusion. Ardra once told us that she is known by many names. Well, at least in that, she was being honest. Her crew have admitted that she is known by 23 aliases in this sector alone.
You had no right.
Deceiving innocent people with her petty schemes for years. Ventax 2 must have offered her the greatest opportunity of her nefarious career. She learned of the myth of Ardra, studied it, and so expertly played on your fears that your people were ready to virtually surrender to her.
And, since this is already a Clark-heavy episode, we're going to add one more reference, one more thing that Arthur Clarke said that's very applicable to The Devil's Due. It's a pretty good example of Clarke's law, which is that to the primitive mind, any sufficiently advanced technology is, say it with me now, indistinguishable
from magic.
That's right.
Now, on to another story by another of the giants of the golden age of science fiction. Fred Pohl and his short story, The Day the Icicle Works Closed, which was first published in the February 1960 issue of Galaxy, which is a science fiction magazine of the time, and which we talked about already back in 2023 in our episode called Labor Relations. It is the story of the collapse of the economy of the planet Altair 9, a world whose economy depended almost entirely on the harvesting and export of rare and valuable pharmaceuticals, which can only be found in the microbes which are found only in the frozen ecosystem of Altair 9. Think about, spice in Dune. These drugs can only come from the unique environment of one planet, and this makes the Icicle Works a very profitable enterprise. It's the same type of thing.
Yeah. It's a viable, profitable manufacturing economy. The hero of the story is a lawyer named Milo Pulcher. And during the climactic courtroom scene, Milo tells us that, quote, the Icicle Works was the most profitable corporation in the galaxy. unquote. So, very profitable enterprise. Until word got around somehow that a competitor had finally managed to manufacture those antibiotics they produce synthetically. Oh, no more need for Altair 9. The people of Altair heard about this through their only link with the outside world, a media corporation. Remember that word, media corporation, called the Tourism Bureau. Very innocuous name for a media corporation. Suddenly, nobody wanted their products anymore. The good years ended. The market collapsed, and suddenly, almost the entire population of Altair 9 was unemployed. So, on Altair 9, the only place left where unemployment could come easy is renting your body to tourists to hunt local game called airfish. And this I pulled out years ago on my blog from my very own dog-eared copy of this story. Quote, worse, the jobs vanished. Pulcher, who was our hero here, had been on the corporation's legal staff with an office of his own and a faint hint of a vice presidency someday. He was out. The stenos in the pool, all but 2 or 3 of the 500 who had once got out the correspondence and the bills, they were out. The shipping clerks in the warehouse were out. The pump hands in the settling tanks were out. The freezer attendants were out. Everyone was out. The plant and the planet was closed, unquote.
And yet somehow, even though the economy had collapsed, the elite still had plenty of money.
Weird.
These were the politicians and the heads of the Chamber of Commerce, people whose fortunes, you would think, were most directly tied to the implosion of this industry. Overnight, their stock portfolios became worthless, and yet they always seemed to have plenty of cash on hand.
Because they invested in Trump coin and Doge.
Oh, Doge and Trump coin, and maybe Melania coin, too. Smelania. So with the economy in the tank, our hero goes from corporate lawyer to public defender, picking up the case of a gang of young people who, not being pretty, strong, or agile enough to make ends meet, turned to kidnapping. Milo Pulcher is the attorney who gets assigned to a case in which 5 young men and 1 young woman had tried to kidnap the mayor's son.
Yeah. And in the story, this seems to be a pretty open and shut case until Milo discovers that the young woman is an old girlfriend of his. That piques his interest. And that's when he starts digging and he discovers what's really going on, what has really been going on the planet Altair. Quote, what it all adds up to, ladies and gentlemen, is that Charlie Dickon and a handful of his friends in high places, most of them right here in this room, have cut off communication between Altair 9 and the rest of the galaxy. Unquote.
In other words, the story we have been told up to that point is not one of a new and superior product displacing an inferior one in the competitive market. Instead, we find that everything that's happened was the part of a plot hatched between local plutocrats and media owners to deliberately crash a thriving, middle-class manufacturing economy and induce a depression in order to turn a prosperous world into a feudal state divided between the super-rich and a horde of desperate and permanently poor peons. People so broken and economy so bad that they must now rent their bodies out to make a living or turn to crime.
And this, I want to emphasize, there's a law in science fiction about 90% of everything is crap. Mm-hmm. But the 10% is this kind of science fiction. This is why this kind of science fiction endures. Because while there are no human beings on Altair 9 and no single entity like the tourism board controlling the galactic media, right here in 2025, stories of greedy corporations screwing up people's lives for profit are all around us. They were sitting up on the stage at the inauguration.
Yep.
Representatives of those meetings that screw up people's lives for money. And so are the stories of politics catering to moneyed interests to the detriment of the rest of us. And stories of religious faith, of credulous people being exploited by con men. And stories of propaganda being fabricated by media corporations in order to invent a crisis where there is none. And
you mean like a caravan of illegals coming to kill your child?
I mean exactly that. Or in the previous years gone by, the terrorism level.
Alert system.
Suddenly going up when George Bush's poll numbers go down.
Yeah.
Or when it's time for an election. In order to advance the political agenda of those media corporations and the politicians that they're in bed with.
So let's go back for a minute to Arthur C. Clarke and the explanation for what sent Hal on a murder spree in 2001, A Space Odyssey. Now, Driftglass and I agree on this, that all in all, it would have been better if the cause of Hal's psychosis had remained mysterious. But since the 2010 movie is now canon, whatever, okay, here we go.
Do you know why Hal did what he did?
Yes, it wasn't his fault. He was instructed to lie.
What are you talking about? I didn't authorize anyone to tell Hal about the
The
monolith.
directive is NSC 342/23, top secret, January 30, 2001.
NSC, National Security Council, the White House.
I don't care who it is. The situation was in conflict with the basic purpose of Hal's design, the accurate processing of information without distortion or concealment. He became trapped. The technical term is an H-Mobius loop, which can happen in advanced computers with autonomous goal-seeking programs.
The goddamn White House.
I don't believe it.
Hal was told to lie by people who find it easy to lie. Hal doesn't know how, so he couldn't function. He became paranoid.
Those sons of bitches.
Hal was ordered to lie, and that broke his brain, right?
Yep.
And life teaches us that you don't have to be Hal to be damaged by liars. Any decent person, any moral person who sees people in power brazenly lying and getting away with it can feel helpless and trapped in a loop. There is no automatic shutdown mechanism that will intervene to stop liars from lying to your face, from spewing toxic propaganda, knowing that they are protected by wealth and power and that millions of people are willing to go along with all the lies because they read at a fourth grade level, right? Or they're afraid, or they're greedy, or they're just plain evil, or they think God wants them to be this way. I mean, there are all kinds of really bad reasons why a critical mass of the American public watches Fox. As Powers Booth's Senator Rourke explains in Sin City,
Power don't come from a badge or a gun. Power comes from lying. Lying big and getting the whole damn world to play along with you. Once you got everybody agreeing with what they know in their hearts ain't true, you got them by the balls. There's what, maybe 500 people in this hospital. I could pump you full of bullets right now, and I wouldn't even be arrested. Everyone would lie for me, everyone who counts. Otherwise, all their own lies, everything that runs in the city, it all comes tumbling down like a pack of cards.
Until you see it happening right in front of you, it can be hard to understand how much power there is in lying and getting away with it and getting other people to go along with it. But don't worry, next time we'll get back to talking about politics and the media, we promise.
sure, we promise.
Just thought we...
Science Fiction University is a project of DGBG Productions. You can support the show by donating via Patreon at patreon.com/proleftpod. See you next time.
See you next time.